So today I have like 3 working titles for this episode. It's going to be something around the biggest pitfalls of big families or families in general, honestly, because any family with a couple kids can still suffer from some of these. And also just kind of some warning flags, maybe, that the health of your family is not that healthy in the long term. Like it may show up later if we aren't in tune to some of these little stages of development, or maybe some little errors, some little pitfalls, some things we can fall into as parents or overlook as when it comes to raising our children. These are just things that Elisha and I have seen in other families. Some of the things our parents did really well in our families, some of the things I think they learned from. No one's ever a perfect parent, and our goal isn't to be perfect parents, but we do love looking around and being like, oh, there's these themes that are consistently showing up in families where the children aren't talking to their parents as adults, or maybe they're resenting their parents as adults. They're our ages and they don't have the rich, rewarding relationship that we currently have with our parents today. What can we do when it comes to parenting our own children that sets us up for being friends for life and not feeling, our children not feeling like, wow, you really messed us up? So I'm sure there's like so many things on this list that would qualify, but these are just a few. Okay. These are just some things that have stuck out to us. So if you enjoyed this episode, if you enjoy any episode on the Now That We're a Family podcast, we love when you screenshot it, share it to your stories. We love to see who's listening, what episodes you're enjoying. And it does help us get the podcast out to more people when you share with your like-minded friends what we're talking about here on Now That We're a Family. We love when they join the conversation as well. So thank you guys for sharing that. Thank you guys for leaving your ratings or reviews. That's another way that gets the podcast out to more like-minded people in this community. And we just couldn't be more grateful for our listeners.
The Now That We're a Family podcast.
Wow, Katie, I am drawn in after that introduction.
Really?
After everything you just said, I am eager to hear all your thoughts on this topic in today's episode.
I'm eager to hear yours, Elisha. This isn't like a one-sided rodeo.
Yeah, those are the worst. Have you been to a one-sided rodeo?
Can you picture like a bull without a rider? I don't know. Or like a cow without a roper? No.
I don't want to picture that.
I don't want to picture that either.
Yeah, it's interesting, Katie, as time goes on and our children grow in age, you start to see themes that you experienced as a child. Like our kids are coming to an age where like you have memories, I have memories of being that age in our own families.
Yeah, it's crazy.
Yeah, it is crazy. And so it makes me stop and reflect and contemplate the various things that my parents did that I'm so grateful for. And I think I've taken for granted in a lot of ways. There are so many things that we take for granted, I think, from our parents that you don't even realize the significance of it maybe ever. But as you grow and you become, more mature as a parent, you probably understand the significance of it more. But in seeing our kids come to, Leon's going to be 6 next week. And then we've got Lucy, who's going to be 5 here in a few weeks. It's like, wow, my parents were so intentional already when I was that age. And granted, I had older siblings when I was 5 and 6. And so they had probably grown, maybe when their oldest was 6, they weren't as intentional, but they learned, they adjusted, and they made some changes in their life. But it's made me so grateful. And it's really realized how, it is so necessary to be vigilant as a parent, like to day in and day out, not take a day off of knowing where your child is. And I mean, even before that, it's like knowing where you're at. It's like, where is my hope coming from? Where is my head right now? Am I being transformed by the renewing of my mind? Am I going to God's word for direction, for my ground, for becoming grounded, and where am I at in my marriage? And you can't take a day off on those things ever, because as our children grow, the ramifications become so much more severe, positively or negatively. And so, it's a sobering season, I think, in regards to parenting?
Yeah. So something that initially kind of spawned this thought in me was I'm a big advocate that, well, okay, let's say this. I think there's a lot of myths out there regarding parenting, and especially parenting multiple children at one time. And I think one of those things is that you can only have one or two kids if you're going to give those children a valuable, relationship rich and intentional life experience growing up as a parent. Like, you only have so much time to pour into so many children. And I think growing up in a family of 11 kids, Elisha growing up in a family of 10 kids, we've seen that to be disproved, that parents can stretch themselves and grow themselves, and by God's grace, pour into, a dozen children in a highly effective and intentional and loving way, where these children are not shortchanged by there being siblings involved in their lives. And in fact, their lives can be even more rich because of that. So that's something that I like to encourage. Maybe if you feel like your kids have come really close together and people will say that, they've stolen time from your other children, or maybe you've had more children than you think maybe you should have because you feel really stretched thin at times. I know that I've been there where I've just been like, am I giving each child enough love? Satan can really work his, take a little bit of truth and work in those fears that we have as parents, that we aren't going to be who our children need us to be and who God needs us to be for our children. But the truth is, if the Lord has given us these lives to steward, then he is going to also give us the grace and wisdom. It is there to be able to raise these children. It doesn't necessarily mean, though, that we're going to tap into that.
Yes.
And be intentional in the ways that we do need to be intentional. Yeah. And so I was receiving comments on a certain post, and I wish I had the exact post with me right now, but it was comments on a certain post where women were saying, yeah, that's what I tell everybody. My kids are going to grow up to be just fine. They don't need a ton of quality time. They don't need all these things. And it was funny because I was like, no, that's not what I'm saying. I'm saying you do need to be even more intentional, but it is possible to be that intentional. It's not like our kids are going to grow up and be just fine if they're just one of the pack and they never have a conversation with you and they don't have that quality time and you don't get to know them on that one-on-one level. They need that. I just want to inspire you as a parent that it's possible to do that when you have a lot of children. Not that that's not a necessary part of a child's development.
Yeah, I think that's so good to clarify, Katie, because even when you were talking about the fear that can come from having many children, or even maybe you're in a season of having your children close together, and the fear is I'm not going to have enough time to really get quality time with each one of my kiddos, then maybe a more validating voice would be, don't worry about it. Just like, it'll all work itself out.
Yeah.
Or you don't need that much quality time with each one of your kiddos. And we embrace things like that as humans. It's crazy how, like, when we feel that we're failing to meet the ideal in our brain, and then you're given like a
cop out.
Yeah, you're given a cop out. You're like, thank you. I'm holding to that. Like what that person said. You don't, and it can be in any area of life. It's like, thank you. I knew I didn't need to eat healthy to have, a good whatever. And we do that with parenting. Where it's like, oh, thank you. Yeah, I don't need to have all this intentional time with my kids in order for there to be a vibrant relationship long term, and in order to be this role of discipler and friend and counselor in their life. And that's not the point. The point is that no, you cannot replace time. And I'm so grateful that my dad is still vigilant. Like, my dad is such an inspiration to me, because not only do I love the way he parented me when I was younger, and all of my siblings agree on that, and how he parented us, but now that we're adults, he's like remaining ever as vigilant in a different role. Clearly, like he's not parenting us in this, like, telling us what to do type of way, but he's very much in a mentor and a counselor way, telling us like, hey, no, you've got to be vigilant with your kids. And I remember him even talking about like the 5 love language book. And he would talk about parents that are like, well, I'm not really a quality time person. And my dad being like, no, you don't get it. When you're a parent, you learn all of them. Like, you learn to love in all the ways that your children need to be loved. There's like not a cop out for any of those things. And I think both of our parents exemplified that. And it might have required a little bit of like what seemed like sacrifice short term.
Oh yeah, for sure.
And be like, oh, well, see, like they had to take time from this and put it into their kids, or they had to, lose momentum in their career or whatever, hanging out with their friends. And in our short-sightedness, that looks like a loss, it looks like a sacrifice. But of course we know, according to God's word and according to just, reality, which God's word speaks to reality, you're actually investing in your wealth in the most optimal way when you're pouring into your children.
Yeah. And I'm glad you brought up the Love Languages book, because not every child is a quality time person. If you're familiar with the love languages, there's different ways that we receive love. And so a child, it might be like a words of affirmation child, where you tell them they did a good job, and that means more to them than if you spent an hour doing something with them. Or maybe their gifts, maybe their physical touch. They just want a back rub. They just want to snuggle. I know that can be one that's kind of tricky for me, because I'm not like the most cuddly, touchy person. So I have had to learn to embrace, hey, my child's loving me this way, and I can love my child this way. But regardless of whether your child is a quality time person or not, getting to know that child in a very intentional way, getting to know their needs in a very intentional way, what they're thinking about. Your children are never one of a pack. And I think that's something that when you have a lot of kids, sometimes we can kind of, it's nice to kind of package them up and be like, how's the general vibe? How's the general health culture of the family? But a child could be getting lost in there. And so something I just want to encourage is not buying into the myth that this isn't God's design and will, that you have all these children that you have, and that he's not going to be faithful in that to you as we look to him as parents. But also not buying into the myth that, hey, it's all going to turn out okay.
Yeah.
If to whom much is given, much is required. And there's a lot of blessing that comes with a lot of children, and there is a lot required that comes with a lot of children. And so leaning into that and growing our own capabilities to meet their needs is something that I think is a challenge worth rising to the occasion for. And it's just something I never want to be a part of, is maybe encouraging this philosophy of, oh, kids just turn out okay. Kids are resilient. Kids are all these things. No, kids are very fragile and they need us.
Yeah. It's crazy. I love, Katie, you saying, with great blessing comes a lot of responsibility. We're with great, what's the saying? Like with great opportunity comes great responsibility. What did you say? With great?
I don't know. I think I just kind of made it my own. I think I said with great blessing comes great responsibility.
That sounds good to me.
Whom much is given, much is required.
That's what I was trying to remember. The phrase. And I think of that you and I both grew up in communities where there were a lot of big families. Mm-hmm. And of course, still to this day, there are numerous motivations for why people have large families. But one of, I think, the thought processes that you and I witnessed and that we did not want to be a part of was saying, okay, children are a blessing. Just have as many children as you can. And that in and of itself is like,
blessing.
Like that's just have them. And then it ends there. And of course, that's not the truth. And that is human life a blessing. Yes. But like by bringing a child into the world, you are stepping into that role and taking on the responsibility of parenting that child and of discipling the child and caring for the child.
Like your mom would say, creating them to be a blessing, turning them into a blessing.
Yes, exactly.
And cultivating the blessing in them.
Yes, that's right. And really drawing the blessing out. And that just straight up takes time. And both your parents and my parents, they didn't have this philosophy of like, yeah, we just need to crank kids out. And that's us being obedient to God. And who knows, what happens after that. They really saw the blessing in children, but they also understood the sober reality that they were going to need to mine the blessing. They were going to need to disciple this blessing for years to come. And that was going to require, like you said, intentional time and real effort in order to see that through to fruition.
Yeah. And they're still not done.
Exactly.
And I think that's beautiful. We're just like, we're always working and learning and growing as parents. We're always parents. Once we become a parent, it's not over at 18. It's not over when our children get married and leave the home. An involved parent, someone that's, not too involved, but a parent that's always there when you need them is just an incredible gift to a child at any stage of life.
Yeah.
And I see that with my own parents and their parents, my grandparents. My parents still call them up for advice and for wisdom.
Yep.
And there's still an ear and someone that they can count on. And I just think that's beautiful. Just that generational, never just throwing the torch away and being like, oh, I'm done with that. Check that box,
Yes.
but still that involvement and that in tuneness. And something that you brought up too, I love that you said the world's just really offering us all the time these excuses to be mediocre and to not rise to the occasion and to not offering us these outs, like easy out. And I think that something okay, there was this parenting book on, I don't know, I was in a hotel and I saw it on the TV, and it was a secular news station, and they were explaining these parenting books that were like so great that they were recommending them. And one of them was, the title was a little crass, okay? But it was, You Can't F Up Your Kids. And as they kind of go into the book, I got so upset. I left the hotel lobby because I'm just like, that is not true. As a parent, you can mess up your children in many, many, many ways. And you can't just, they were saying all you need to do is love your kid. But it's that is so vague. Love your kid and we have to love ourselves and we have to love everything. You know what I mean? It's the self-love and it's our children need love in a very practical day-to-day basis. And it does matter what we do for school, and it does matter who their peers are, and it does matter, all these little decisions we make do add up and do matter. And it was just kind of throwing out the intentionality of parenting and saying, oh, it's going to all work out. And I think when you look around at our society, you see it doesn't all just work out. God calls us to, we just did a YouTube video last week on ways that we spend intentional time with our kids. And I think that if you guys are looking for practical ideas on how we personally do that in this season of life, but something that we talk about in that video is the Deuteronomy 6. You're teaching your kids when you walk up, when you stand by the way, when you walk up, when you walk up, when you walk up. Yeah. So anyways, but I love this quote and I have it written down. You guys know I'm the Charlotte Mason, newly sworn in believer. And she has this quote and she says, I'm going to butcher it. I believe mothers can work miracles when miracles are required of them. I believe mothers can work miracles when they realize miracles are required of them. And I think that's so true. If we realize as parents, you're required to do something that's greater than yourself. We need Christ's strength in parenting. We need his humility, his wisdom, and powerful things can happen when we realize that the bar is set high. And especially when it comes to motherhood, I can say this just from social media and stuff, the bar is very low. It's your kids are the laughing stock. Fed is best or whatever. Just keep them fed however you can. Just do whatever you can to get by, instead of setting this bar of strive for excellence, strive for excellence. And I think it's low for fathers too, because no one even talks about fathers. Fathers are just a joke. They're just not expected to do anything. And they're one of the kids and we disrespect them in our language. And it's just bad.
Yeah. Well, we don't even need to use our own standards that you could seem arbitrary or subjective to people. We can use God's word. You already referenced Deuteronomy 6 and we'll put that below, but also what is the Proverbs? To train up your children in the way they should go. And when they're old, they will not depart. And
isn't that from I don't know where that is.
Isn't that, what is that?
I thought you said it wasn't in Proverbs.
Oh, you're right. Is
it was
that first or second?
It was in John
or something? Is that what it is? Okay. All that below too. And then I think it's in Ephesians where, it says mothers and fathers, do not provoke your children to wrath. And we're given, and that's just a few. I'm going to find a bunch more.
I
List
think
them
it's
below.
specifically fathers don't provoke your children to wrath.
Well, there you go.
Mothers are excluded from provoking our kids to wrath.
Nice. But there are Bible passages that tell us exactly what to do. And Deuteronomy 6 being a clear one for those are like people of God do that. They disciple their children. They teach them the ways of God throughout the entire day. And of course, we don't provoke them to anger, and we train them up in the way that they should go. And that can be very practical, and it can also be in spiritual things too. And spiritual things usually become practical, once you grow in those areas. And because I think what's so easy, and this is why standards are always wavering, is that it's so easy to point to people's standards, say, well, that's just subjective. Like for that parent, it might mean daily Bible times and, doing homeschooling this way and family, whatever, like whatever they think is a high standard. They're like, for me, it's this thing here. And it's like to each his own. Then you look at God's word and you're kind of like, no, parents are not given the option on many things. Like one thing, discipleship, like, no, that is given as a command to parents for you and your children. And so will that look different in each home? Yeah, but it is incumbent upon you to disciple your children. It's like, it's not for you. You can't be like, well, yeah, we just let our youth pastor do that. Or we kind of like let their uncle do it because he knows the Bible better. It's like, no, it's you and it's for your kiddo. And so I think when you own that reality and that responsibility that the Bible gives to us, then you start fleshing out how that looks practically for your home, because intentional parenting will look different from home to home, but it will always require intentionality and effort from the parent. Like, and
it never just happens on accident.
Yes.
So we're like, oh, whoops. That's amazing. My kids are just great.
Yes.
We love each other and we have a great relationship. Or maybe it was something that was just so deeply rooted in who you were as a parent and your value system that you translated that to your children because you did value the quality time or you did value the intentionality. I do think there's parents that maybe you don't put a name to it or whatever, but just the way that you're living life and by your value system, it's God's value system and you're investing things into your kids.
Yes.
You know what I mean? So maybe it feels accidental because it's just such a part of who you are.
Yeah.
But I think for most of us, we need a little outside encouragement.
Yeah. And I would say even with that, I think you always have to be ultra in tune to what your child needs and what, like I don't think we can take those things for granted. Like, I don't think we can
Well, I definitely can't. I'm just saying it might come easier for some people than others based on who's seen it modeled.
Yes.
Based on so many different things.
Yes.
Like, I think there's things that you do in marriage, loving me, that is second nature to you because it's what you saw your dad do. I feel like that with what I saw my mom do. It doesn't necessarily mean it's easy, but it means there's just this path and it's the one clear path to walk down. So you walk down it.
Yes.
It's not like this battle to do that. You know what I'm saying? Like, there's certain things that you pick up.
Yeah.
Okay. So I want to talk a little bit here about birth order.
Okay.
Because I think that this is something, these are questions. So my parents do a newlywed retreat every year. And when we were younger, when I was still single and all of us kids were still at home, we would always show up on the last day and everyone there could ask us questions, see if our parents were fakes or not. So anyways, one of the questions that I got asked as the oldest of 11 kids consistently was, are you bitter that you were the oldest? Do you feel like you were the second mother as the oldest? And how did that affect? Like, do you want kids? Do you not? People were really curious about that. And there was almost always someone in the audience who asked because of their experience raising their younger siblings, feeling like they had that parent role. And as a result, it kind of jaded them when it came to wanting to have their own kids. And that stood out to me as this consistent thing. And growing up, I saw this to be the case. Like Elisha said, we had a lot of big families we were around. And a lot of my friends that were in their teens, 13, 14, 15, they were mothering their younger siblings. We would go to events and they couldn't play the volleyball match because they had to stay and help their sibling eat a meal or get dressed. And their mom would be off like chatting it up. And I was just like, your mom's crazy. Like, my mom's taking care of the babies. And something that my parents were so intentional about that they would say all the time is, we had these children. We chose to have these children and they aren't your kids. And so as a result, I was very footloose and fancy free as a teenager and as a kid. And yeah, we did things like the buddy system where I had a little sibling and I'd take them through line with me at a camp or whatever and get their food. But I was never mom. I never had to hold the baby while my mom was off chatting or doing her hobbies or working out or going on lunch dates with other women or building a business. And I've seen a lot of resentment. And now, I'm a mom of 5, almost.
Yeah.
and a lot of my friends at that age or grew up that way either haven't even wanted to get married or haven't had kids because they're just like, I did that. I was mom. And I think that that's something that my parents did really well. I never felt the responsibility of parent, even though, you helped out with your younger siblings.
Yeah.
But it was like at the end of the day, they were my parents' responsibility, and I never felt that. And that's something that I want to give to our kids.
Yes. Like you said, we want to teach our children to be responsible, and they'll have chores around the house and they'll be hard workers. But parenting is our job. Like we brought the kids and all of our children into the world, and it's our responsibility to be mommy and to be daddy. And I'm with you. I don't want our kids to feel this pressure of, I need to take care of, like, I need to tend to the well-being of my younger siblings in some way because daddy and mommy are too busy, recording a podcast.
Yeah. That's something I want to be intentional about.
Big time. Me too.
Because I think this is a fine line because my parents did raise us to be very capable. Like I did babysit my younger siblings, at 10 years old, they went on a date and I was babysitting the kids, and I loved it. And I thought it was cool that they gave me all that responsibility with my other 2 sisters right next to me. We all did it together. And so that was awesome. Right. And I do think a lot of parents, they maybe start in with this perspective of, especially if you're wanting to cultivate domestic skills in your daughters and stuff like that, because they are really lacking in the world. A lot of girls grow up and they don't know how to cook and they don't know how to keep a home. And, those are practical things. I think that it starts out with this kind of like, well, my daughter's going to need to learn how to cook and keep a home and watch children one day. So I am going to facilitate that in her by having her take over these roles in our home. And then as a result, daughters like Mrs. Domestic at 12 and 13 and mom's off like living her best life in retirement. It's just a joke. And it's so sad for me to see because having responsibility, having capabilities, having your kids be able to babysit, make meals, whatever is wonderful. But there is definitely a line that it crosses over.
Yeah.
And that I've seen very consistently in big families.
Yeah. And you say living her best life in a sarcastic way. We actually don't believe she's living her best life. That's the irony. Usually when that term is used, that's not the truth.
Yeah, I think I say it a little sarcastically, but I also say it in a true way. She's not having to make dinner every night. She's not having to, watch the kids. She's off something very practical, like recording a podcast. Like I don't want Leon and Lucy to feel like they're home raising our kids and we're off doing something.
Yes.
I'm helping your dad work in business or whatever. Like that's something I want to be very aware of because I've seen moms tap out too early and go help their husband start something. And I'm not saying there's not times to work together with your husband. Like that's going to be a part of her life to some extent. But you guys get it. I think with almost everything with relationships, there's these fine lines. It's not black and white. And that's what makes it tricky because if it was black and white and there are 5 steps to raising perfect kids, I mean, we'd all be like, sign me up,
Yeah. Well, I don't have to speak hypothetically with this stuff and talk about, other people doing this. Cause I think that I've found myself so recently falling into these excuses, falling into these, saying things that 2 years ago, I would have been like, well, I just don't believe that, or I'm not going to say that. And it's been really convicting, even in regards to this. And it's probably not as true for you as it is for me in regards to like my goals. It's like, I want to do this with now that we're a family, or I want to do this with the next property that we buy. And you start, maybe I wouldn't say it out loud, but I would start making these little subtle compromises in regards to, even date night. Where it's like 2 years ago, it's like, here's the question. Do you need a consistent date night to have a healthy marriage? It's like, no, I don't think you do. Do you need to consistently date your spouse to have a healthy marriage? I think you do. And I think a date night facilitates that. A date night can really facilitate dating your spouse. And it's crazy how like a year ago, 2 years ago, when we had less money, when we had less time available, I was like vigilant about creating a date night for us, whether that was tracking down a babysitter, saving money to go out to eat. And as we've gotten busier with life and, the kids have gotten older, so they're requiring more of our time and our energy. And then we're getting more and more plugged into our local community. And so now we go to a small group one night a week. I go to a father-son ministry one night a week. Now, because of the new work schedule, Katie only works, roughly 3 hours a week right now. And it all happens kind of in an evening time. Mm-hmm. And then we have our Sabbath night, and then we have usually somebody over for dinner throughout the week. And so the point in me saying all this is, oh man, the evenings fill up really quickly. And I found myself like 3 or 4 weeks ago being like, well, you know what? Like Katie and our marriage can thrive without a consistent date night. I know we're talking about parenting.
I'm like, I do not know. I feel like this is like what Elisha's processing personally. And it's like coming out on this. I'm trying to see how it connects.
The point I'm saying is I found myself going down that path of basically buying into the excuses of like, yeah, you don't need it. Come on, you can have a great marriage without having a consistent date night. And that was creeping over into how I was viewing my children. Like, you don't need the X, Y, and Z to have quality relationship with your children. It'll all work out. And I was compromising essentially on what I knew was best, because I know what's best for our marriage, to have a consistent, ideally weekly date night. That's just best for our marriage.
For us, it is. Yeah.
Yeah. And I don't know what kind of marriage out there doesn't do better when they have more quality time, like intentional time together. Does that make sense? I'm not saying you have to make it happen weekly, but that is ideal. So when did I stop going for the ideal in our marriage? I talk about like my marriage being the second most important thing to me. It's like my faith and then my marriage. And so I'm not going to go for the ideal in that. And I'll put that time towards my business or towards other people in our community or towards, my hobbies, because that's ultimately where that time was going. And I was starting to make these excuses and find all sorts of validation out in the world, right? Like it's not hard to find validation for that. And that was starting to creep over into my parenting, where I was thinking like, well, you know what? The kids are young now. While they're young, like, you hear this, I'm just going to work hard while they're young. And then when they're older, I'll be able to spend all this quality time with them. I don't know how many times I've heard people say that. It's just kind of like, I'm just going to work my face off now, then I'll have all this time later. And it's like, no, parenting's right now. Like the priorities are being formed right now. The discipleship's happening right now. And so again,
well, you're always laying the foundation right now for the next stage.
Yes.
And I don't think you notice till the next stage when, the foundation's out. Like that was a faulty foundation.
Yes.
And so, and I think the Lord's so gracious to give us little things at a time.
Yes.
Right? He gives us like an infant and it's so overwhelming for us at first. And we're like, how do people do this with more than one kid? Right. Yes. And then we get 2 and then we get 3 and somehow we keep growing these new capabilities. And I feel like it's like that with the ages of our children too.
Yes.
Like we're intentional when they're infants, then we're intentional with their toddlers. And it's like the stakes go up a little bit higher with each age range. The mistakes are more dramatic if you do make a mistake, and kids start to see through you more. And you need more humility, I feel like, the older that you get, because your kid doesn't know if you're proud or not when they're 4 and you tell them what to do. When I'm 14, they do. They sniff that out. But I think if you don't have that foundation of the toddler years, and that relationship building and that obedience training, then in the middle years, the middle childhood, you notice that. And if you don't have that foundation of middle childhood, you notice that in teens.
I think you do notice it, but I think this is something that I think has caught a lot of people off. And we read about it in that book. I think I mentioned this last week too.
Yeah, I know. I actually wrote that down as something to talk about. I kind of want to, okay, we'll go there and then we'll go back to birth order. Because there's 3 things I want to talk about in birth order.
Okay. Okay. So I'll wait until that. Okay. Since you've got a plan here.
No, that's okay. Talk about it right now.
All I want to say is, speaking from my own experience, and I think that this is a thing that is common in culture, is that we think it's like the worst thing ever to feel bad about how you're doing something. It's like,
that's true.
Like if you feel bad about how you're doing something, the last thing you should try to do is improve upon it.
Yeah, just make yourself feel better about doing feeling bad about it.
Exactly. And so I found myself going down that rabbit trail of like, I really want to spend more time with Katie. I probably should. No, instead of leaning into that and being like, if I'm feeling guilt in regards to my marriage or my parenting, I should consider that. I should take that to heart. And I think a lot of times Christians, we lean on that Romans 8, there is therefore now no condemnation for those that are in Christ Jesus. And that is 100% the gospel truth. Amen. But there's still conviction of sin. Mm-hmm. There's still our conscience that lets us know when we're out of God's will. Like we get to live in this freedom of not being under condemnation, like being positionally righteous because of what Christ has done. But we still have a conscience and we still have the Holy Spirit convicting us of sin. And when we're out of line with what God's priorities are. Mm-hmm. And I know for me, it's like, I'll adopt this attitude of like, well, if I feel bad, the last thing I should do is address the thing that's
making me feel bad.
And
maybe get better at it.
Yeah. I should go find something or a different standard that validates my current priorities or my current habits versus being like, wait a second, like my conscience is kind of pricked every time a week goes by that I don't take Katie out on a date. Like
we're still talking about the date. Elisha, use a different example.
Like, instead of going and validating, well, this is good. It's just kind of like, wait a second. Let me actually lean into that. I do value my marriage. I want to put my money where my mouth's at. I want to put my time where my mouth's at. And I want Katie to see me sacrificing in other areas for the sake of marriage. And that's a big thing. It's like, once you start realizing, I'm gonna have to sacrifice this, I'm gonna have to sacrifice an evening jujitsu class to have a date night. Like, well, that's actually really easy when I view it as like, what's more valuable? Does that make sense? But if you just keep going week after week after week, then you can easily find people to validate why you're doing what you're doing.
Yeah, no, that's true. Oh my word. That is such a tangent. I think what you said is really good. I love everything that you said. I think it's really true.
I know I departed from the whole parenting thing.
It's some extra golden nuggets.
The thing is that it was starting to creep into my parenting. Does that make sense? Where I was looking
it ties
for validation.
In somehow, but really, we need to get a date night. Sounds like we really need a date night. Okay, so no, that's really good. It's probably going to be like people's favorite part of the podcast. Okay, so I do want to go like jumping back to birth order. If you're cool, are you cool if we go there?
I'm pretty cool with that. Yeah, I've said my piece.
Okay. Talking about middle children, because this is something that did not. When people would always ask, how's your experience growing up in a big family? I'm like, it's great. It's awesome. I loved it because my parents were really aware of the whole eldest child thing. Okay. Feel like they nailed that. Felt no pressure. I was good. But then as I've gotten older, I think I have really realized the difficulty that can come for parents with the middle children. And something to keep in mind is that the middle child is often changing, right? Yeah. So like right now, Louis, I would say, is kind of our middle child. We have 4. So, but with this 5th child, it's really going to bump him into middle child position. And I think even now we have 2 really big personalities in Leon and Lucy. We have a boy and a girl. So they both kind of have their own things, their own like draws and things that take our attention. And then Lawrence is the baby currently. And the baby always demands attention. Right? They're like the most needy, and it doesn't matter if the baby is newly born or like our giant 2-year-old toddler baby. He takes a ton of attention. And so we started noticing like Louis is our current middle, and it's really easy to overlook the middle child, and it's easier for them to become one of the pack than any other child in that birth order. And I think also middle childhood or the middle children can come at a tough spot for moms and dads because you're trying to like your first kids are kind of like your success path. Like you're like, I hope I can homeschool this kid. Yeah. If you're homeschooling, right? Or you're hoping they're going to get educated, however you're educating them. You're hoping they're going to have some social skills at the end of the day.
I'd say even backing up to the beginning, it's like, I hope I know how to train this kiddo. So like sit still through church, like be obedient. Like when they're running out into the road, it's like that they'll stop right when I say and come back to me so that I keep them. It's like, you've got it dialed in.
Yes.
with that first one.
Like they're taking all your attention at every stage. And like at a toddler stage, yeah, like we were focused on like toddler training because that's all we were doing. And now it's like the middle kids or the older kids are always cracking into new territory. So
Yes.
it's always new and kind of like sketchy for you as a parent. They're going to be driving first. They're going to be dating first. They're going to be like all these firsts, and you're on your toes because you don't know what's going to happen. And so they're so consuming. And then if you have little kids, then you're trying to, take care of all their
just
needs.
the physical needs.
Right? Yeah, there's a lot of physical needs with little kids. And these middle children, especially when you have teenagers, that's going to put often the middle children in that like middle childhood range where they aren't causing a lot of trouble. That's the most chill age, like 6 to 12 of like developmentally. A lot's happening underneath the surface. There's a lot of hidden currents underneath there, but it's not coming out yet like it does in the toddler stage or like it does in the teen stage. And so it's really easy to just be like, we're good. They aren't taking a lot of energy. There's not a lot of demands on my time. They're following in their older siblings' footsteps. At this point, we aren't super stressed out because they're going through stages that we've already had like semi-success or learned from with our older kids. And so we can just kind of miss out on their experience in the family.
Yeah, we
and as individuals
neglect like the time, putting time into them.
Yeah. They have a hard place in the family order.
Yeah, I think like you said, especially when they hit that. Can we cross over into the book now?
Yes,
when they hit that, when they hit that age of, and this is a generalization, but the book is when your kid is ages 6 to 12.
We'll have it linked down below. We recommend this book all the time. We read it when Leon was 5. I'm rereading it again now. Elisha is too. And we want to reread it every year.
Yes. Because to your point, Katie, the shortcomings in your parenting tend to show themselves forth in your children's behavior when they are younger. Mm-hmm. It's like, wow, we miss a week of child training. You take them to church and you're like, okay, wow, back to the drawing board.
They're
like,
in control.
Yeah, we got to make ourselves boss again. And so it's like very cause and effect, and it's pretty instant. And then, like you said, when you've got teenagers, it's a lot more noticeable. You're like, boy, like they're not talking to me or they're acting up in this way. But that age range of 6 to 12 ish, like your children are naturally people pleasers. They're naturally wanting to please you, and things are generally just good. Like they don't want to be dramatic. They want to be relationally close with you. They're
their
not
primary motivation is their parents' pleasure.
Yes.
So they just want you to appreciate them. It's not necessarily discipline or, negative attention. It's just wanting you to think they're awesome.
Yes. And so the point that this guy's making in the book is that oftentimes parents will take for granted their parenting, or they'll think they're doing great. So it's like, man, my 10-year-old, they just love me. We're on such good terms. They are so helpful with their siblings. They love going to church with me. They love our family Bible times, but they're not actually building this relational, I guess, trust and this relational equity. We use that term a lot, so that when they do hit those tough teen years, their parents are like the people they go to. Like, so in other words, the ages 6 to 12 is this great opportunity to capitalize on the child's like
devotion.
Devotion to you, and be like, okay, so this kid really loves being with me. They trust me. They want to please me. Let's hit the word of God. Let's establish some doctrine in their life, some theology, knowing what is true, what is false, what is good, what is evil. And then it's also establish a deep relationship. Let's go get experiences together. Let's just garner this huge repertoire of experiences together. Let's grow in our friendship. Like, they're going to act like they're cool with me regardless of how good our relationship is. So let's make a point to actually make it a good relationship, because when adolescent hits, it's like the true colors of your relationship will show. Yeah.
And so we're kind of talking about like middle children, but this whole like middle childhood thing has been really big for us because, one, we're entering into it. And so we really want to become experts in it. 2, it is the foundation for the teen years. And I want to have my children's ear when they're going through those seasons and when they're making really big decisions for their lives, potentially. And, that's a point that I actually put down here as a potential myth, like Elisha already touched on that, or a pitfall in all families. And that is just summed up in, you do not know how good of a job you are doing parenting when your children are in middle childhood. when they're 6 to 12, you do not know if you are doing a great job or not, because your children are going to have just this level of devotion to you. And they aren't going to act neglected if they're being neglected. They're just going to be happy for the crumbs that you're dropping them. And in their teen years, they're going to look back and be like, man, you were dropping me crumbs.
Yeah.
You expect me to have respect?
Yeah.
You expect me to listen to what you have to say to me?
Yeah.
And so that's just a season where I see so many parents be like, no, it's great.
Yeah.
Like you said, like my kids, the way they're being educated isn't affecting their worldview at all.
Yeah.
You're like, you have no idea. Give it a few years, and then you're going to see the fruit of what was going on in this season.
Yeah. Because
you're walking blind.
Yeah. Because with the whole education piece, they're not going to challenge you until they are in their adolescence. They're not going to question whether or not you're a voice of authority
or what they believe, or
yeah, exactly. Until they're in their teens, or they hit adolescent, which whatever age, it feels like it's coming early and earlier these days for kids. And so, yeah, like what actually have you done relationally and education wise that they are going to then like resort to and fall back on when they are in those years where they are questioning everything, and who are they going to go to as an authority?
What are their moral standards? What are their character standards? Who do they value? Who's speaking into their lives? All that stuff matters in those years when it doesn't look like it matters at all.
Yeah.
And then we realize it's too late in the teen years. And obviously we're really young parents. Our oldest is 6. So this is not a personal experience thing at all.
Oh, I feel like I've thought so much about it. It's as good as experiencing it. I just lay in bed and I envision it.
Kind of like when you're single and you picture how you're going to be as a parent.
Yeah. Or as a spouse for that matter.
Yeah,
you're like,
that's
I'm going to be such a good spouse.
You are.
No, visualization is powerful,
Well, I do think looking for the future and learning in a season, at any season, is valuable. And obviously we're not going to, again, act this out perfectly. We're going to look back and be like, oh man, we're going to have regrets like anyone else. But I do think being aware of like, oh, when our kids are this age, their devotion to us is not an accurate representation of necessarily how good we're doing in our parenting, if we're being very effective or not. So just kind of doing the best that we know to do, seeking the Lord for wisdom just as much as we were seeking him for wisdom with, the 2-year-old that's running the show. And not letting off in that stage, but keeping the intentionality, keeping the conversations going, keeping the time going, just doing what we know how to do best, or doing what we best know how to do. What am I trying to say? Like just taking the steps as best we know how.
Yeah.
And
not saying, I don't know
trust
how to.
that the Lord's going to work in that.
Yeah. I mean, that's an interesting, just thought process there. Cause I think that a lot of times we'll say, oh, the Lord, the Lord knows, like it's a toss up. Like they'll come back to him, or they will not like what we do in their childhood and in their education and in their training.
Doesn't matter. It's
doesn't even matter. Exactly. The Lord's going to work his will. And clearly the Bible speaks to the opposite of that there is clear cause and effect in how we parent our children, and even not just our children, what we do as individuals, like what we put into our mind affects how we think. What we read and study and meditate on forms our convictions. It forms our thoughts. And we've got that ability with our children now to start shaping their worldview, to shape their thoughts. And I think it's like, do we have the ability to save our children? I don't think so. The Lord does that. Like the Lord saves
absolutely not
our children. But do we have the ability to disciple our children? Yes, we do. Do we have the ability to train up our children in a way there are promises given to parents, to Christians, say, hey, yes, treat your children as though they are Christians. And this is how that looks. As a parent, you disciple them, you teach them God's precepts, and you let them know that they're set apart and they live different from the rest of the world. Yeah.
And then kind of touching on the baby, right? Because you talked about the eldest, the middle kids, the kids that are kind of in the middle age range, and then the baby of the family. And I think that with the younger children in the family, especially the bigger your family spread is. So, the further the distance from your first child, age range wise, to your baby, whether that's 3 kids or 10 kids, my parents had this thing that they'd always say, we need to finish the race. We need to finish strong. We need to finish strong. And I remember I was in my teens. We were at a family camp and Elisha's mom was there and dad, and they had brought Elisha's 4 younger brothers to the camp. And I was kind of surprised that they didn't just come with their older siblings because, you know, they were old enough that their older siblings could take care of them. And I remember Lisa, your mom, saying, well, she goes, we need to finish strong with these boys. They still need our input. And I just, that really stuck out to me. You know, she was like, I still have these boys. They still need a parent looking over them. Yeah, they have big siblings, but there's nothing like me being here present to just, you know, make sure they're good, see who their influences are, check in on them. And I think that's really cool because it's really easy to lose steam, right? We're like zealots when we start out as new parents.
Yeah.
Like we are going to do everything right, whether it comes down to like the material the pacifier is made out of, or like, you know, everything is just like, we're so intentional. And then by the time that last baby comes along, it's easy to fall off the bandwagon. And also it's really easy to start letting the older children dictate what the younger children are being exposed to at what age.
Yeah.
And that's just something that kind of comes with having a big family.
Yeah, that separation
is
in
like
age.
your teenagers are aware of pop music that you didn't have in the home when you had, you know, Barney playing in the background for your younger 3.
Well, I mean, if you've got Barney playing for younger 3, then you've got
I don't know.
other problems. I feel like
What do we play in the home? I don't know. Like we like the little like Steve Green worship songs, right? Like hide them in your heart.
Yeah.
That's what we have playing in our house these days. And it's like everyone's totally cool with that. They think it's awesome, you know? But then I remember, you know, being the oldest, I'm 16, I'm 17, I'm driving now, I'm bringing home country music. Some of it's good. Some of it, looking back, had more meaning than I knew at the time.
yeah.
And it's like, how do you navigate that as a parent? Because that's natural. Your older kids are getting older, but then how do you still guard and protect the younger kids without them just being exposed to things that aren't necessarily keeping their innocence or keeping that carefreeness that maybe the older kids had when they were younger? So I've seen people navigate this well and people not.
That is a challenge though. That's just a tricky situation.
My parents are in that stage right now.
Yeah. I mean,
they're talking about it, you know?
Yeah, I've talked about that with like how different when Joby was
your
12,
oldest brother.
My oldest brother, Joby, when he was 12 versus 20 years later, when actually not 20 years later, when 16 years later, my brother Rudy was 12, the youngest in our family. Sorry.
I feel like they might be 18 years spread.
18 years spread.
Because me and my youngest sibling are 18 years.
And it was similar. Yeah. So
similar.
The point is that Rudy was 12, 18 years later from when the oldest Joby was 12 in our home. And it looked the landscape had changed dramatically.
Yeah.
As far as the media in the home, the music in the home, like you said. And a lot of that I think a lot of that can be good. Like obviously you have to be vigilant in what you're exposing your kids to, but also by the time my brother Joby, my brother Vance was, oh gosh. By the time
when you have this many siblings,
by the time my brother Rudy, the youngest in our family, was 12, the 18, 19 and 20 and 25 year olds in the family were having a lot more serious theological conversations, and the conversations around the home were about marriage and about training the grandchildren. And so they were also exposed to, in a positive way, a lot, almost like more mature thinking too.
Yeah.
So it can be positive.
I do remember your parents kind of like being like, we need to rein this in, and kind of reestablishing new boundaries.
Yes. With some of
the younger kids once they get to a certain range. And I think that that's something we just always have to be open-handed with when it comes to our parenting, reestablishing new boundaries.
Yes.
Because it's easy for our boundaries to just kind of slide over time, and we get comfortable with certain things.
Oh, yeah.
And we need to Elisha and I are going to listen to this like in 20 years and be like, yeah, we need to finish strong.
Well, what's cool is that finishing strong as a parent, I don't think it ends not cool. I think we need to view it this way. I think it is powerful. It's a lifelong journey. And that's like my dad's viewing it more and more that way. It's such a Western and an American thing to think like, I just got to get my kids out of the house, like get them to 18.
Like, what does that solve? You still care about this kid. And when they're off making terrible decisions, it still hurts your heart. Like,
and honestly, it's like
they're making great decisions. You're so grateful.
Yeah. But also just like the responsibility should only increase at those stages, because the decisions they're making from 18 years and beyond are all the more detrimental to like the outcome of their life. Does that make sense? I mean, obviously
or positive. Yeah.
For positive or negative. Yeah, exactly. The point being is that it's like, man, just have this perspective that this is finishing the race is just like finishing your faith, the faith, it's finishing the race as a Christian.
But it's having the same intentionality with our younger kids that we had with our older kids.
Yes.
I think going through different seasons.
Yes.
Same intentionality with their education, the same intentionality with training them spiritually, the same intentionality with guarding them and protecting them.
Yes. And it looks different because you can't just boss your 16-year-old around like you boss your 4-year-old around. Right. But the intentionality can stay the same.
Yes. The intentionality just kind of stays the same. So anyways, I think the number one pitfall in big families is ultimately parents that don't have a humility before Christ and a dependency on him and think that they have the answers.
Wow.
So that is not what I want you guys to get from this episode is that we have the answers, because I think that is the number one pitfall that I see. And kids smell that out and eventually are like, you are so wrong. I'm going to make my own decisions. And I think that's something both our parents still are. They're still humble. They'll still ask for forgiveness if we bring something to them. And I mean, we're so mature compared to them. But I feel like
you said immature or
we are. You know what I mean? If
Yeah.
there's something like I bring up to one of my parents, like they're still like, oh, thank you so much, Katie, for saying that. Like, it just makes me feel like, wow, like I need to hear from you more,
Yeah. Wow. I mean, God opposes the proud, but gives grace to the humble.
Yeah.
And I think that grace can really be seen in families where it's like my parents had humility and God was gracious towards them and their family. Your parents were so humble before God and before us too, which is crazy. And God was so gracious in their family.
Yeah. Because really, God's the only one who could guide us in this way with our kids.
Yes.
It's not a program, or more people would be doing it right. So anyways, maybe that was a little food for thought. Maybe you could like talk to your spouse about it. Maybe you can disagree, or come up with some of your own pitfalls that you think families see. We're always open and on the lookout for like, what are potential pitfalls, not only in our season, but in seasons coming up. It's just, parenting's a big, long, exciting journey, and it's filled with so much like joy and so much potential. Like, who knows what's going to happen,
And it is nice to identify various dangers, and various obstacles. It's like the most dangerous enemy is the one
you can't see.
Yeah, like you don't know exist or something. I think it's something like that. I think it's Sun Tzu or something. And
just Google Sun Tzu, okay?
Yeah, the most dangerous enemy. The point being, like, as soon as you can identify various dangers and enemies, then you're able to combat them or avoid them.
Yes.
Because also Sun Tzu said, dang it, I can't remember any of these quotes.
Elisha,
it's like the best.
Do you know what Sun Tzu said?
The best course of the best course of victory is winning without engaging, or something like that. Dang it! This is the worst. Let's just end this thing before I think of more
Sun Tzu
half quotes to say. All right, folks, thank you so much for listening.
We'll get you next week.
Bye-bye.